be a motivational speaker if that's what you want to do, but don't try to tell people that you know the way and they should live their life this way so you can make millions of dollars and have multiple houses all around the country for yourself.
Welcome back, Rob. Good to see you again.
What's up?
Let me just say, you are looking healthy and strong and young, virile.
What Dave is referring to is the fact that I just turned 40, and that along with me, slowly climbing my way over the hill, I have recently been diagnosed with a variety of health problems that really has me, thinking through my life in a different way. So, most recently, I was diagnosed with sleep apnea, a minor version of sleep apnea. I've already had issues with my heart. I have some AFib. I got to get that fixed. I've had some issues with my back in the past, stenosis in my spine, which is like a narrowing of the spinal column, towards the base of it. And now I have sleep apnea.
Okay, it, those all sound like they're pretty serious. I also know that you're like a partial vegetarian because it like hurts your tummy, right? It How much of this is you just being a hypochondriac? Like, how did you find out that I get the AFib, but the rest of it is this created by you being a little softer than the average Joe?
If I would eat a live cow if I could run again. So
Okay.
unfortunately, I don't think that is the issue. And I mean, I probably eat about a chicken a day,
But
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 no
s
cows. Yeah,
but steak
yeah,
is
a little bit
well,
much,
a
a
little
little
tough
bit
on the
much.
tummy.
That's right. So what's happened with the sleep apnea is at least for now, knock on wood, I don't have a CPAP machine. So I don't have one of those things I have to stick in my nose and makes a bunch of noise that just puffs air down my throat. Instead, I have a mouth guard that is like molded to, molded to my teeth, and I have to sleep with this thing. Like,
But go back, how did you find out? Was Jen just like, I thought you died 3 times last night?
yeah,
Somebody was
essentially. She's
watching?
like in the middle of the night, she's like, I think you just stopped breathing. And then you go,
Oh,
she's like, you need to get that checked out. So I did, and it was right on the cusp of sleep apnea and not. And then I had the AFib thing, and I said, well, that could be related in some way.
oh, wait, how is that related?
I
Like,
have,
you don't no oxygen or something?
yeah, something like that. I don't remember how it's all related, but they said you should go get that fixed now that you have sleep apnea or now that you have AFib. So yeah,
Did you have to go do a sleep study?
yeah. Well, yeah, we just did it at home. So I was hooked up to a machine at home, and they just measure my breathing at night.
Oh,
So I don't have to go anywhere, which I guess is relatively new. Not that long ago, you would have to go sleep in like a doctor's office, and they'd
yeah,
monitor
that's
you
what I
or something
thought.
like that. Yeah. Um, but fast forward to today, got my mouth guard. So can't wait to, sleep with my mouth like this all
Yeah,
night.
yeah.
And they gave me exercises to do afterwards because my jaw is gonna be like I'm gonna look like Marlon Brando in The Godfather. My jaw is gonna be pushed forward uh
Yeah.
for like, 7 or 8 hours a night. Uh
And then so when
and
you
then
get up, you have to do some jaw flexing to get it
that's right. Chew
pulled back.
gum. They gave me like a plastic pipe to chew on. Yeah, it'll be pretty interesting.
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. The first is you're never gonna have sex again. And
Yeah, yeah, it is not the most attractive looks. I can do like this, go,
yeah.
"Hey, Jed."
Okay, but first of all, it might be a fetish of hers. You never know. She could really into it.
That's true. I mean, tonight will be the first night, so we'll see.
Yeah. And I think those jaw exercises will give you a more chiseled jaw, right? They're selling those
That's true.
jaw chewers now. That's the
That's
new,
true.
like, you know,
Huh, there's something with what?
there's the at least on my Instagram feed.
Hmm.
On my feed, they're selling 2 things. that you may benefit from. One is they call it hostage tape, where they tape your mouth. You tape your mouth shut when you go to sleep, and you just breathe through your nose, and it stops sleep apnea, and it like supposed to give you more oxygen when you're sleeping. Hostage tape, and I've thought about buying it. It just uh, and I can't. I don't know what it's called. I want to call it Jazzercisers, but it's like a big rubber ball that you chew on, and when you're chewing on it, it builds out your jaw muscles, and then that gives you the chiseled jaw, the squared off
Yeah, yeah,
jaw
more
quality.
squared off jaw.
Yeah, and you're gonna have that.
I mean, hey, there has to be an upside to it. I'll take a more squared off jaw.
Yeah,
Maybe I'll have to shave my beard if that happens so everyone can see how chiseled I
yeah,
am.
this is gonna be a good move for you. I
So
think yeah,
so yeah, this does have me thinking, because I am not like someone who practices a religion or anything, but maybe this is a sign is I need to find Jesus. It's something's
yeah,
happening.
maybe. Well, I'm thinking, man, I can't believe I chose a podcast partner that's 95 years old, you know?
Yeah,
So
I mean, let's get these episodes in now because who knows? My expiration date is nearing.
yes, yeah. Well, this is a good segue. We're gonna work on your existential angst in this
Okay.
podcast. Okay, what I want to talk about today is this idea of spiritual narcissism.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of that term, spiritual narcissism?
Honestly, before you mentioned this as a topic of conversation, I had never heard of this.
This is my new favorite explanation for all of the people that I hate online. So here's why
Okay.
this is a point of passion for me because, as you know, I spend a lot of time on Instagram yelling at people.
Rage scrolling.
Yeah, I do a lot of rage scrolling. I
Yeah.
very rarely do I post because I'm worried now because my Instagram handle says pops up. People know who I am. I'm so I need to get like a burner handle that I can just use to yell at people. But the people that use their spiritual beliefs to manipulate and maneuver other people drive me freaking crazy. So this concept of
Okay.
spiritual narcissism is when it's a psychological or it's a behavioral phenomena where you are leveraging your spiritual beliefs, but more important than like your actual belief system, your ability to articulate those belief systems to exercise superiority over other people. So
Okay.
let me just give you an example. If I can talk more clearly about ethereal topics than you can, then when we're talking about what happens at the end of life or when we're talking about how we should live, you're going to end up being deferential. You could end up being deferential to me because I can talk about this thing in kind of a more clear way than you can.
Okay.
So like it reminds me of oftentimes in relationships when you have somebody who is more articulate, they're able to dominate the other partner just because they can over communicate what they're feeling or what they're
Over
thinking.
logic. Yeah.
They can over logic the person even if their position is wrong. And I think spiritual narcissism is that unhinged. This is the idea that I'm going to use my ability to talk about the bigger picture, talk about death, talk about life in a way that gets everybody around me to sort of bend a knee and act like I am the most important, most thoughtful person around.
Is it about the person, like I'm the most important person, or is it more my belief system is the most important? Like, is it, hey, I'm Rob and you got to listen to me because I know what I'm doing, or hey, I'm a Catholic and you better listen because Catholics are the best.
I think it is I am more important.
Okay,
If
so
we
there's
can
that.
talk about that, it is what you're doing or what they are doing is they are using their understanding or their ability to communicate spirituality as a way of elevating themselves above other people.
That makes more sense, and it sounds like you're giving me an opportunity to uh, shit on like online influencers and social media. So I'm all about
Oh,
this
there we go.
this
You like
topic of
that.
conversation. I think
Yeah.
we're both going to get something out of it. This is
Okay,
one of
good.
the rare times
Okay, good.
where we might be more in agreement with what's happening here. I'm ready to shit all over these people. Let's go.
Let me explain it by first just explaining what narcissism is.
Mhm.
Okay. So narcissism comes, and I want you to jump in here, but narcissism comes at its core from insecurity.
Mhm.
Typically, people have a traumatic background, and as a consequence of that background, they're deeply insecure, and they can't tolerate that level of insecurity or the distress that comes from insecurity. So they create this like alternative idea of themselves. Their ego can't handle it, so it creates this sort of alter ego where they are perfect. People that are narcissists will lack empathy. They'll have delusions of their own importance. They'll need a lot of positive feedback. They
Mhm.
constantly compare themselves to other people. They are focused on their own growth trajectory. All of those things are narcissistic characteristics.
Yep.
And I think a lot of time we look at those people and we go, "Well, you're just really selfish. I'm not interested."
Mhm.
Right? The narcissism, I think, is it's not always easy, but it's easier to look at and go, "I don't want a part of that person."
Yep.
What's diabolical about the spiritual narcissist is that they're kind of tapping into other people's existential angst to make their sort of alter ego more important.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm articulating this well, but if you're afraid of, for example, let's just say hypothetically that you had a bad ticker and a weak stomach and a bad back and a weird sleep pattern. If you had all these things, you might say, "Hey,"
Hypothetically, yeah.
hypothetically, you might say, "Oh my gosh, I, I better get my ducks in an order from a spiritual standpoint." And if I can communicate about spirituality differently than you can, you're going to sort of go, "Oh, well, David, you're right." And you're going to give me all of the praise and
Right.
you're going to elevate me the way I need to be elevated because at my core, I'm super insecure
Mhm.
and have that narcissism at play.
Right. Now, that does make more sense, and I like your definition of narcissism because, like a lot of psychological terms, it's entered the culture a little bit more. So people use it to just describe anyone who they feel is a bit more self-centered or doesn't think about other people.
Mhm.
So I like your definition to kind of get at some of the core reasons as to why it exists, that insecurity and things like that. Would you say, given your understanding of the term, like do those same reasons for why narcissism more broadly occurs? Is that the reason why someone would be a spiritual narcissist as well? Like, are they insecure? Do they lack empathy? Those types of things that you mentioned.
I think there's two things. I think one is yes, they're naturally, they're more insecure
Mhm.
and it's protective. There's also this concept called spiritual bypassing where we all have issues that we have to deal with. We all have challenges we have to deal with. And if you tell yourself and you tell the world around you that you've got it all figured out from a
Yeah.
spiritual standpoint, you can kind of skip over the work that it takes to
Yeah.
process through our deeper wounds, right?
Yep.
This idea of you're going to use your spirituality to bypass whatever the stressor is.
Yep.
And I think that is like when I learned of this term, I was like, man, this is a little bit like a cheat code to get the praise that you want as a narcissist and to skip over, really working through your distress
Yep.
as a narcissist.
Yep. And I think it makes sense that social media would be a platform or outlet for some of these people to demonstrate or to yeah to behave this way, in part because it sounds like, yeah, there's that, like, that image part of it, like, I know, like, I'm some sort of sage or wise person, and so you should listen to me in social media, right? I mean, that's what an influencer is, right? Listen to me.
Yes.
Don't understand why, like, I'm not gonna tell you why you should listen to me, just I'm gonna skip over that. Just know that I have the way.
Mhm.
And it sounds like, again, you're gonna find those types of folks trying to, communicate that message more on those types of platforms.
Yeah. So what I wanted to talk with you about is how do you identify the person that's a spiritual narcissist versus the person who truly is enlightened?
Yeah.
Like, how do you imagine you can separate those two things?
I don't know the full answer yet. If I just think of like a spiritual person, religious, spiritual, whatever it might be, versus someone who's a bit more narcissistic in their tendencies around their religiosity or their spirituality. One thing that comes to mind for me is humility. Like
Mhm.
understanding, like if I think of like I grew up Catholic. You did too, right?
Yep,
Yep.
yep.
And I think of, there's a certain order or type of priest called Jesuits, and I went to a high school where there were a lot of Jesuit priest teachers. And I remember a lot of them instilling into me and into the other students there the sense that, humility around your belief system is very important, both because there's a variety of ways to get to the same outcome. And I think that there's also this sense of when you're interacting with other people and you want to have an actual conversation, the best way to turn them off is to come at them with this sense of the moral high ground.
Mhm.
So that would be the difference between maybe a more spiritual person who's open to hearing things that are a bit different versus saying, I have the right way. Humility.
Yeah, yeah. That there's a judgment that can come with
Mhm.
narcissism.
Mhm.
It's an interesting thing though, because if you think about like I have in my mind like 5 or 6 people I think online who I think hit the diagnostic criteria, how I would describe spiritual narcissism, right? It's people that are super articulate, they're very spiritual, they wanna talk they're leveraging their spirituality to separate themselves from their audience. It's a little bit like setting up a cult online. I know what's best for you, follow me in my ways, and this is gonna be really valuable for you, but just remember, I know this better than you do. But if I remove the word spiritual from it, like, then it makes me think, well, is that not what any influencer is doing, right? You're on there, you could be a fitness influencer. A fitness influencer is just as judgmental about what other people are doing.
I don't think so.
Okay, same, why not?
I think that as well, I'm not the most avid consumer of social media, but what I see, my guess is that there are a lot of people who just make that their job.
Mhm.
So it's like a lot of other people who sell things. They may be a little bit into it, but I bet more than anything else, their basic driver is this is a way that I can make money.
Oh, that's
So I
interesting.
don't think that everyone who is influencing, so to speak, is as invested in the product or thing that they're selling.
That's interesting. So, yeah, a fitness influencer is selling their coaching or they're selling their pre-workout or their protein or whatever. And this is the way to sell their
Sure.
services. Whereas someone who's talking about, you know, doing ayahuasca and how enlightened they are as a consequence is not selling things in the same way. They're selling their wisdom,
Right, and
perceived.
maybe more broadly, they're selling a brand. Like, they're selling an experience, they're selling a lifestyle
Mhm,
as opposed to a product,
mhm,
and I think that's maybe more the worrisome part of this is these people who are selling that lifestyle
mhm.
more than a product because then maybe they do start drinking their own Kool-Aid and believing some of what they're saying over time, and it becomes this sense of, you know, superiority about what they're doing and how they're living their life and how they take care of their body, whatever it might be.
Do you ever find yourself influenced by that?
I'm sure I have. I mean, we're all influenceable. Um, Not by that type of an example doesn't come to mind for me
Yeah.
that and again, part of it is just the social media, but I am influenced by other people, and I think for me, and this is my own ego, is I am more likely to be influenced by someone who I perceive isn't trying to influence me.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Is if I have a conversation with someone and it sparks an idea for me, I'm a lot more likely to be influenced by that than by someone trying to still sell a lifestyle to me because inherently I believe that those people in general
Mhm,
either don't believe, that's where I made the comment, they don't believe in what they're actually selling, or
mhm.
they're full of shit and they have no basis from which to make these assertions. They're just doing it because it works.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I don't
What
know.
about you?
Well, I don't think that I am, and I'm trying to sort of parse out here is like, well, what's the mechanism that makes somebody buy into this idea or whatever the idea is, right? Going to the one that stands out to me is ayahuasca. I'll give you a tangible example that just drives me freaking crazy. Will Smith and his wife Jada
Mhm.
Pinkett Smith, talk a lot about how enlightened they are. They talked about it a lot before the slap, and they continue to talk about it after the slap. Drives me absolutely nuts. Will Smith, I think in his book, said that he had done ayahuasca 14 times.
Okay.
It's not working. Okay. Like, like, I don't understand why anybody would listen. Like, when he was bragging about doing it 14 times and how enlightened he was, that was right before he went on stage and slapped somebody.
Right.
And I feel like there's no feedback loop for like, hey man, hey, whoever you're listening to or whoever you're trying to be, it
It's
doesn't
not
feel like
working.
there's not a lot of data supporting this approach. But it's like for some reason, people are drawn to Will Smith, and for some reason, Will Smith is drawn to whoever these influencers are that are selling this idea of going into the woods and getting naked with a bunch of co-eds and vomiting all over himself 14 times,
Yeah.
right? I find myself not wanting to buy into that. And I don't know if it's because I have less existential angst, maybe,
Right.
or I have it could be I have a less existential angst, or maybe more ego strength, or the opposite. Like maybe Will Smith would say, "Well, maybe you're not interested in self reflection,
Yep.
and you have no personal curiosity, and you're stupid and not willing to grow." Maybe that's the other side. That's the other side of the coin. But I find myself not interested.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking a lot about that episode we did about cults a while back, and one of the conversation points there was, what are the common characteristics of people who might join a cult? Like, what's their psychological profile?
Hmm.
And I'm not saying that these two things are the same, but I think there are some overlapping characteristics of
Hmm.
people who would buy into something like that versus people who would buy into a cult. And part of it is, yeah, they're looking to solve a problem. There's something going on in their life, and this lifestyle, quote unquote, coach, this guru, this expert
Hmm.
says something that strikes a chord with someone at a certain point in time. It could be Will Smith with ayahuasca. It could be, I feel like this is a lot of what's happening with those like fitness lifestyle people. Like, I've seen ads before, these are the three things you do for, to lose 10 inches in 1 month.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. But it appeals to a lot of people who have an issue that and they want to fix it. And so
Mhm,
I think that that's it, is you're you're hitting a certain type of person at the right time
mhm,
with a message that appeals to them because it's addressing something they want to change.
mhm, mhm.
And so for Will Smith, it might be that, or it might be, I mean, he's talked before, right? I mean, he shot to fame really quickly. He grew up really quickly. I don't know much about his family background, like, growing up, what that was like, but
Yeah, traumatic.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it would make sense that someone like him is searching for,
Mhm,
an answer or a set of answers that helps him navigate his life,
mhm.
to
Yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah.
But it does bother me too, and it bothers me less about the people who do it and bothers me more about the people who sell it.
Right.
Like, those people, even if they believe it, like, there's some culpability there. Like, what the fuck are you doing to these other people
Yes.
who are obviously in need?
Yes. Yeah, so there's the people that go do that who listen to Will Smith and go do ayahuasca, and there's the Will Smith, and I don't even know really where Will Smith falls into that. He might be following somebody else.
It
It's
sounds like it.
like multi-level marketing,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It's sold downstream.
Uh-huh.
But what's interesting also, if you think about, like, I've been trying to figure out, well, what's again, like, how do you parse out who's the real deal as far as just believes in their whatever it is, and who doesn't? And one thing that stands out when it comes to spiritual narcissism is there's always a mechanism to get their other needs met.
Yeah.
So if somebody in your life is using their spirituality to sell things that don't really seem like they're very good,
Mhm.
but serve them well. So, for example, sex with a lot of people, lots of power, lots of
Mhm.
money, lots of attention, right? It is a self-serving endeavor that's feeding the narcissist
Yep.
versus somebody who is really into their faith or their spirituality.
Yep.
So, do you think that that's the difference? Because as I talk about it, I go, all right, so spiritual leader has strong beliefs and then wields their beliefs to judge other people and guide other people. That sounds a lot like a priest to me. So are so I was thinking like how do you separate traditional religious leaders from a spiritual narcissist? And I think that's the answer is that the traditional hopefully most traditional spiritual leaders are not there for self-serving reasons.
Right. And I think that's it. And that's I don't know the answer to this question, but at least, Catholicism is the religion I'm most familiar with, so I'll use it as an example. I believe that that's part. I mean, I know that part of the reason priests and nuns can't marry is right there. I mean, God is their North Star, is their spouse, whatever it
Mhm.
is.
Mhm.
But I also imagine that that also prevents them from having more of, kind of their focus either is on, I mean, it's only on them, right? They're not searching and trying to, like, make more money, whatever it is, for anyone else, including a family. It's just them.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I imagine that that creates a bit more focus for them as opposed to another religious leader who has, the same um desires and issues that you and I do, trying to provide for a family and kids and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I also think, going back to it, the priests and religious people that I've known, that I've listened to most, are those who, again, have humility, who acknowledge, why does this bad thing happen? I don't know.
Yeah.
They're not just glossing over it or saying, we need to not focus on that. We need to focus on the positive thing. They're not like a televangelist
Right.
who's, just what's that gospel of prosperity? Just, give me money and listen to the positive things, and, everything's gonna work your way, go your way.
Which those people, I'm spacing on their name, but there's a real famous I got his image in my
It's
head.
Joel Osteen.
Yes. That feels like spiritual narcissism. It
Yes.
clearly serves him
Yes.
financially, the attention, the whole thing serves do you think that that fits the
I
criteria?
I think so. I'm in St. Louis, and there was a woman, Joyce Myers, I think. She's in St. Louis, and yeah, had this huge church, and then down the road, right, had this, like, compound of multiple houses where her and her family lived, and I was just thinking, "Do we people have to make this connection, right?"
Right. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
be a motivational speaker if that's what you wanna do, but don't try to tell people that you know the way and they should live their life this way
Mhm.
so you can make millions of dollars and have multiple houses all around the country for yourself.
Yep.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
But the question there again, though, is, I don't know the answer is, do you think they actually believe it?
Let's take a shot at that, but I guess the other question would be, does it matter if they believe it or not? Diagnostically. So if you really believe that whatever your faith is or whatever the spiritual position is, if you really believe it and you still wield it to control other people,
Yeah,
are you still a narcissist? Or in that case, is it okay because you're not doing it really to elevate yourself in the same way?
you're right. For some reason, there is a difference there for me. Is like, am I doing it because I really believe I'm gonna help someone? Like, do I really believe ayahuasca trips are going to help Will Smith? And
Yeah.
that's why I'm encouraging him to do it. It may
Yeah.
be ill-founded, it may be stupid, it
Yeah.
may not work, but do I believe it is? So there's something around that intentionality for me
Yeah. I-
that
And
separates it.
yeah, there's definitely, as you're saying that, I'm going, yeah, if you're intentionally misleading people for your own gain, that's worse than misleading people for
Right.
your own gain, but you don't mean to mislead.
But that's still, I mean, to your point though, but both of those people could still be spiritual narcissist because they're not humble. They're not willing to just kind of put a mirror up to themselves and understand, well, what's working, what's not working about their approach. So
Yep.
maybe that's just a different thing altogether. They
Yeah.
both could be narcissists still.
Mhm.
I think you're right.
Do you think that well, I guess so the I have 2 questions. I'll give you both the questions. One question is, how do you identify if you are someone who is looking for support in some area, let's just call it spiritual support, how do you figure out what influencer online, who what person you should be listening to and following?
Mhm.
How do you figure out who the narcissist is? And then the other question is, this dynamic exists. There's not, I mean, arguably, there's not just spiritual narcissism, but there's political narcissism. There, you know what I mean? You could say there's occupational narcissism. There's every psychological narcissism. Whatever you're into or whatever you're looking for. Don't we as humans leverage our expertise to separate ourselves from the milieu?
Right. Um, 10 points for using the word milieu. Good job.
Oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah.
Um, for anyone who's, studying for the SAT.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think you're right, but it goes back to because I think when we start attaching the term narcissism to all of those, all those other words, I think that's when it starts to separate from what it actually is
Uh huh.
into just more of a sense of being self-interested and not open to hearing what other people have to say.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's first reaction. Reaction number 2 is, yeah, I think it can happen all over the place. And if I was working with someone and they were asking me, how do I spot and any type of narcissist?
Hmm.
I would say, I mean, I've said this word too much, but someone who's not humble,
Hmm.
who's always right. I would say someone who believes, again, they always have the answer, that they know what to do at all times, who is unwilling to receive or hear an alternative idea, theory, style, or approach to something. Someone who is very reactive and defensive.
Hmm.
Um, and then there's this sense of like self-righteousness. And again, we did a whole episode about self-righteousness, but
Yeah.
there's a sense of with the spiritual side and maybe some of these other adjectives you're adding to the front of this term that comes to mind. And I mean, even as psychologists, right? Like people could be listening to us and especially listening to me sometimes the way I talk about people and think, well, why does this guy think that he knows what he's talking about? And are we self-righteous around our understanding of people just because of what we do? And are other people who don't have our
Hmm.
educational background experience just as able to
Hmm.
do some of that?
Hmm.
But people who aren't willing to acknowledge some of those things would strike me as more likely to be narcissists.
Yeah.
What am I missing?
I think all of those things are right on. And I find myself wanting to give like more tangible things that you would have to pay attention to. But I think what stands out to me is how the person makes you feel. If you feel like when you're interacting with this leader or when you're
Mhm.
listening to this leader, if you feel less than, if you feel insecure, if you feel like you can't ever amount,
Yep.
if it makes you feel small, then I think that that's a problem.
Yep.
You know, and that's a red flag that you should be paying attention to. Which, by the way, I would argue you should be paying attention to in any relationship.
Yes.
You know, um, I think if this person constantly elevates themselves through the way that they're communicating, I mean, you mentioned it, but if they can't identify moments of curiosity or mistakes that they've made, then it tells you something about how they're moving through the world, right? They're thinking that they are better than everybody else. They have delusions about how perfect they are.
Yep.
And then I guess the last thing I would say is if you feel like you are being like what sticks out to me is this idea of being convinced to do things that don't logically make sense.
Mhm.
Have you read the book or heard of the book? I think it's called Sex at Dawn.
No.
This is a book I have not read it, but I've heard it enough from influencers that I'm just going to summarize what I think it's about. And I admit that I've not read the book. But the book is essentially about sex and how we evolved as a species not to be monogamous.
Sure.
And that book and the ideas in that book, which I think the author has made an effort to be data oriented in his approach, but that book has been used to convince a lot of people. I used to have clients who had been convinced by their spouses to open up their relationship against their will because this is how humans are supposed to operate. And it's like, I want to be like, no, no, no. The guy who's using they read the book.
Yeah.
The guy wants to sleep with a bunch of other people, and
Yeah.
he's going to use this book to convince you that
Yep.
you should do this thing that you don't want to do. You know, and this, by the way, is no judgment from me around having an open marriage, but it should be a collab. It should not be
Yes.
convinced to do that.
That's the
You know what
thing.
I'm saying? And it's like wielding it to get their needs met, I think is a major red flag.
Yep. As a side note, it's I am sometimes perplexed and sometimes not about these books and just theories around, well, this is how humans were supposed to be. Like I
Mhm,
think of like the paleo diet or something like
mhm,
that.
mhm.
I'm just thinking, well, like what have you scratched to say like this is like how far deep do you want to go? Well, humans are only supposed to live for 30 years.
Right.
Humans humans aren't supposed to be flying around in, metal tubes in the sky. So
That's right.
so
It's a good yeah.
we've adapted a lot because we are a very adaptable species that transforms like no other species, the environment around us to fit our needs.
Mhm, mhm.
So it's interesting sometimes when you hear these books and people talk that say we need to go back. We need to be who this primal version of ourself, our caveman self. It's like, all right, well, don't tell me on your podcast with your, Viore sweatpants and your um yeah, your Lululemon collared shirt and your Travis Matthews backwards hat that's what you're supposed to be doing. Like, come
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you flew somewhere. I mean, so it's so silly to me to hear these people talk about some of this stuff sometimes.
Mhm.
Anyway, that's a side note.
That was a hell of a description. You, like, really saw that person that you just described.
Yes.
That's good.
Yes, because I see these dudes in particular, and for them, I'm maybe more likely to see dudes on my social media talk about this stuff, but the eye roll, like I do a straight 360 in my head, like it goes backwards and then comes back around.
Do you I feel like I should say I just looked up to make sure I had it right. The author's name is, Christopher Ryan, who wrote Sex at Dawn.
Okay.
Anybody wants to check it out. I read his book, or I started reading I read half of his book, Civilized to Death, which is about how we have the same author, how we have not, that we think that civilization is progress, but it's actually not, in that when we were before civilization, we were happier and more peaceful than we are today. Anyway, it,
What?
I disagree with everything that he says, but I want to make sure that I'm saying this right. He's a evolutionary psychologist, and I think his goal is to be accurate in describing the facts. I don't think he does that, but I don't think of him as being someone who's a spiritual narcissist. But I think that if you're so inclined, you take whatever you can and you turn it into your thing and manipulate other people with it.
Yeah.
You know. Anyway,
So you and I have talked about this, but that just high level summary of that book makes me interested enough. You and I should read that.
which one?
We've
Civilized
not
Death?
read a book, yes.
Okay.
And I like I, again trying to challenge myself to be wrong here, but I can't imagine on any metric where that's true.
Well, I can make the argument for you. I mean, I can summarize the argument is that what you've heard about us having disease and what you've heard about us having conflict is not accurate. And he'll go sort of point by point and say that piece of data you're looking at is not accurate, but rather if you look at this data, we were actually very peaceful. The problem is when you're looking at archaeological data, this is my perspective, and you're looking about thousands of years ago, the amount of, "Oh, this is how it was around the campfire," is crazy. Like, you don't have any idea. You can't look at a arrowhead and tell me you know what they were debating.
No, yeah,
You know what I mean? But
a
that's
clay
the
pot that's 5,000 years old. I mean, you get some insight into it, maybe by what's carved in that, but
right.
yeah, I mean, meanwhile, I'm listening to a podcast, The Rest is History. I'll plug that. Two
Mm,
hilarious British dudes talking about history. It's hilarious. Um, Talking about like Peter the Great in Russia, and before he comes to power, when people didn't like the people that were in power, they would throw these royalty people off of a wall, and all these pikemen would be sitting with their pikes or standing with
yeah,
their pikes ready to go, and they would just get impaled. They would just throw these people off, and you'd have, just feet of people writhing in pain as they're impaled by multiple pikes. So yeah,
yeah.
that sounds certainly less violent.
So Christopher Ryan would make the argument that that's relatively recent history. That was we had been progressing at that point in a negative direction.
Oh, so he's talking about like 10,000 years ago.
Yeah, way back.
Okay.
But I'm happy to read that book or
Yeah,
finish reading it.
I'm interested enough because I believe I disagree strongly, but we'll see.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, so back to the spiritual. I derailed us with that. Um, what else? Anything else we as we think about this that would be helpful for people?
Well, I think we were again talking about spiritual narcissism, and I'm glad we're using the word spiritual here because when you first brought this up, one of the things that went through my head is, well, can people who are not spiritual also be narcissists about or self-righteous about their lack of belief system?
Mhm. Mhm.
Like, is there some sort of narcissism around that? Like, I think of one of my friends who I went to college with. He joined a frat, and I did not. I was vehemently against Greek life,
Yeah.
and he told me once, and it stuck with me. He's like, "You realize that like the people you talk with and you're interacting with, like you're also vehemently against Greek life. Like you're almost like your own frat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you're so opposed to the idea of this that you're almost like you're creating this group of people that have
Mhm.
this common thing that you do together. And
Mhm.
it reminds me kind of like atheists and stuff like that. Like so vehemently against religion, but it becomes almost like a religion to be against religion or organized religion or something.
I think 100% that you could have spiritual narcissism in an atheist who is
Mhm.
saying you should do whatever. I mean, talk about a way to get whatever
Yeah.
he desire you have.
Yeah.
Come on, we should all do whatever we want because there is no God. You're only here once. Lean into the thing. Lead into the moment. You could. I'm sure that there are people that leverage that to manipulate other people and elevate themselves.
Yeah, or just to elevate themselves around, like, them having the moral high ground, because that's what occurs to me most is, people who might be atheists who would say, "Well, look at these sweet, precious,
Mhm,
Christians and Jews and Muslims."
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
they're it's unfortunate that they need something like this to get by,
mhm.
but I know what's actually here. I die and I just rot in the ground, and that's it.
Yep.
I know what's actually going to
Mhm.
happen.
I'm trying to think. I think that you could be even in that role. You could be equally influential
Yeah,
over somebody that's trying to find. Like I think we all just want to kind of have purchase in our beliefs.
yeah,
Someone that doesn't have the solid footing, they can be manipulated.
yep.
Yeah. So I think that's probably my biggest takeaway with this is for people to trust their intuition, trust themselves as far as what they want versus allowing somebody else to guide them in a direction that doesn't feel right.
Yeah, my takeaway and suggestion, this is something I try to do as well, and is trying to differentiate the issue you're trying to solve from the solution that you're seeing in front of you.
Mhm.
So, like why does this like for lifestyle, I've gone up and down with weight fluctuations before. And there are like for a long time I thought cool sculpting, like, yeah, I'm gonna burn this 15 pounds of fat off my stomach and it's gonna be great. Didn't look into it all, and luckily enough, at least I went to someone who told me, and I actually got like a consultation, and she was like, "Dude, like I don't know what you're trying to do here. This is not going to do what you think
This
it's
is
going
not
to
the
do."
right solution.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I think it's differentiating. All right. The issue for me is I want to lose some inches around my waist. I'm jumping to a solution that I think is quick and easy and is going to help me. But is that actually going to help me?
Uh-huh.
And I think that's true for a lot of what we're talking about is if I'm searching for something, well, I need to know that that's actually happening. What is the real need or desire I'm trying to address and fulfill? And don't just jump to a solution without being aware of what the issue is up front.
That
Does that
is
make sense?
it makes sense, and, um, that is miles from how I operate, but I think that I should operate that way. Like,
Well,
that is
again,
very elevate you know what I mean? Like, I think I move through the world pretty reactively more reactively than I should, and the idea of, like, stopping to ask myself, "Okay, like, what's the thing that I'm trying to solve for? And then let's analyze what the solutions are versus, hey, this seems cool. Let's do it. Do you know what I mean? This might work. Let's do it." Right. I think that that takes a lot of restraint and self awareness,
agreed,
but it's a good like aspirational thing to stop and think. Like, that's
agreed.
a great question.
I don't always do it either.
Hmm.
Like, I think most of us, if I had to guess, and this is just my intuition, yeah, that most people, most of the time, are going through life the way that you mentioned, right? It's reacting to something going on in the world around them, and then they move on,
Hmm. Hmm.
and they don't really stop and reflect upon what's actually happening. Same with me, and you and I may, should probably be held to a higher standard given what we do, and we still do it.
Hmm. Yeah.
So it's not easy for sure. My thought here is that if it's that strong of a need that you keep on looking for something and you're not getting the need met or you're constantly let down, there might be a reason why that's happening.
You're right. Yeah. It's just interesting because I'm thinking about like these ayahuasca trips.
Yeah, I was thinking of that too.
Because I think that people, um, I may tell myself what I'm looking for right now is whatever spiritual direction or self awareness, and so I choose. So I think, but then I find myself drawn to ayahuasca. But what I might actually be drawn to is feeling like I matter and the attention. I might be, you know, drawn to the co-eds that I know are going to be there also. I might be drawn to the provocative experience. Like there's all kinds of other motivators that
Mhm.
people may not clock that that's actually driving
Yep.
the behavior.
Mhm.
So the idea of stopping and being like, okay, what do you want to solve for here?
Yep.
I think is a valuable step.
Yep. Especially if you're constantly finding yourself knocking your head against the wall and
Yeah, not
nothing's different.
working.
Yeah. 14 ayahuasca trips and you still smack Chris Rock on was it
Yeah.
the fifth most watched episode of television in the year. So
Yeah. All right, good. Rob, thank you.
yes.
Good talking with you,
Yes.
sir.
Thank you, Dave. As always, if you have reactions to what you heard today, particularly around our discussion around spiritual narcissism or narcissism in general, if you agree, drop us a line in the comments why you agree. If you don't, or if you have a different perspective, drop us a line in the comment section there as well. Social media wise, you can find us everywhere: TikTok, Instagram. I've told you that I finally got Instagram because we do this show. You know,
It's a
Rob of 3
big
years
win
ago
for
would be
you.
very unhappy with
Big
me.
mo Yeah, you've really gone downhill.
Yeah.
It's good.
But you can find us on Instagram as well. And then as always, email us at shrinkspaceshow@gmail.com.
Perfect. Thanks, Rob. Have a
Later,
good
Dave.